Hey everybody, talking about a classic today that I finally got around to. So Jacques Tourneur, hopefully I'm pronouncing that sort of right. Really, he should be well known to any kind of like serious horror fan. Mostly because he directed kind of a handful of the classic RKO like horror pictures from the 1940s, including Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, and The Leopard Man, which was kind of like the male version of Cat People, I guess. Now, I had seen all three of those movies before, like a couple of times, but for whatever reason, I had never got around to watching his later and perhaps even more iconic 1957 movie, Night of the Demon. And this movie often appears on a lot of people's like best horror movies of the 1950s list. So I figured it was about time to, address this oversight like in my movie watching history. Now, the movie was actually retitled Curse of the Demon in the United States. And Wikipedia says that this was because they wanted to discourage confusion with The Night of the Iguana, which was that Tennessee Williams play that was later turned into a movie. But this story doesn't make any sense to me, mostly because Night of the Demon, or Curse of the Demon, came out in the U.S. in 1958, because it's a British movie. But Night of the Iguana, the play, wasn't actually published until 1961, and then the film version didn't come out until 1964. So I don't really know like why they thought there would be confusion, because it was like this one came out first, but whatever, I don't know. So, Night of the Demon, in case you didn't know, not to be confused with like the awesome 80s movie of the similar name that was Night of the Demons, you know what I mean, with Linnea Quigley. This is completely different. This is actually a loose retelling of the very popular M.R. James short story from 1911, which is called Casting the Runes. That has actually been adapted for radio and TV a bunch of times. Now, this version, it takes some liberties for sure, and expands the tale outward quite a bit, as it would have to, like going to movie length. But the broad outlines of the story are pretty much the same as the source story. So at the beginning, you have this academic whose name is Professor Harrington, and he's played by Maurice Denham, who I recognize from Countess Dracula. And he's kind of desperately begging this magician and sect leader, whose name is Dr. Julian Carswell. He's played by Niall McGuinness, who actually played Zeus in Jason and the Argonauts. That's where I recognize him from. He's been in a bunch of other stuff as well. So Harrington is begging this guy to remove a curse that's been placed on him. Now, evidently, what had been going on was that Harrington had been investigating Carswell's like black magic cult, or whatever you want to call it, and Carswell really didn't take too kindly to the scrutiny, I guess. So Harrington basically says, well, you were right, I didn't believe you about any of this satanic nonsense, but now I know better, so how about just backing off on that whole death curse thing, like pretty please with cherries on top. So Carswell asks him, hey, you remember that piece of parchment that I gave you, like, without your knowledge, earlier on? And Harrington says, oh, it actually, like, flew out of my hand and, like, flung itself into the fireplace and burned up. And then Carswell at this point is all like, well, I'll see what I can do about that. But apparently it's too late to reverse the curse, if you want to say. Sorry about that. I just couldn't resist the rhyme there. Because as Harrington is on his way home, he is beset by this gigantic and actually pretty terrifying looking demon that kind of like comes toward him on a cloud of smoke. It's really cool looking, actually, and causes him to like smash his car into a bunch of power lines, and he gets electrocuted. Now, just as a bit of an aside, like I said, this movie is pretty famous. It came out in 1957. So I had actually seen clips of the demon attack or demon attacks from this movie before. And the creature itself is even pictured on some version of like the box art and the poster and stuff nowadays. So it's not like the monster's appearance, like what the demon looks like, is like a big shocker to modern audiences, because it's, the image is out there. But I had always been under the impression, because I had never sat down and watched this movie all the way through, that the demon actually wasn't revealed or wasn't shown until the end. So when I watched the movie for the first time, I was actually really surprised that the creature is shown like so early in the movie. It's like the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, like, big as life. I'm still not sure how I feel about the situation, and like as I was watching the movie, I kept going back and forth on it. So according to the lore surrounding this movie, the director, Jacques Tourneur, he absolutely hated the idea of showing the demon at all. He didn't want to show it. He wanted to leave the story more ambiguous. Like, he wanted to say, it's like, oh, we don't know if there's really a demon or if people were just, like, doing the thing on themselves or whatever, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. But the producers of the movie thought that by showing the demon, like, pretty much immediately and showing the audience that the curse was real, it would kind of, like, over the course of the movie would increase the tension and the dread when the main protagonist of the movie, like, subsequently gets on the wrong side of the same curse and is, like, being stalked by the demon. Gonna say, though, because I'm always more a fan of, like, ambiguity, I think I'm gonna side slightly more with Jacques Tourneur on this one. I don't agree that the demon shouldn't have been shown at all, especially because the monster design itself, like, looks so cool. Oh, and fun fact, Ray Harryhausen was actually supposed to create the demon, but I guess he had, like, a scheduling conflict and he couldn't end up doing it, so the task actually fell to the production designer. His name was Ken Adam, who I think was a German fella. In my opinion, I think this movie would have worked even better if the reality of the curse was left in question until, like, the very end of the movie when the demon was finally, like, revealed, you know what I mean? Just big as life and twice as ugly. I mean, that said, I can see the argument for the other option too, like, that that it's real and, like, the suspense comes from, like, the main character not believing that it's real, but you're like, it is, dude, you know what I mean? Like, I get that. But I will say that the producer's idea of, like, showing the demon so early, like showing their hand so early in the movie, I kind of feel like that had the unintended effect of making the main character, who was, like, this big skeptic, look like this smug idiot whose, like, refusal to consider the possibility of the supernatural, it just kind of had him blundering cluelessly into danger and being a real condescending douche about it to boot. You know what I mean? So anyway, this aforementioned condescending douche is named Dr. John Holden, and he's played by Dana Andrews, who I recognized, he's been in a lot of stuff too, but I actually recognized him immediately from the excellent and sadly underrated 1965 black comedy, The Loved One. If you haven't seen that, see it, it's great. So shortly after Professor Harrington gets killed by the demon, Dr. Holden arrives in England to attend a conference where Harrington was supposed to speak about Carswell's cult, which he had been investigating. So, like, Harrington and Holden, I guess, were kind of like colleagues, and they were sort of, like, working along the same lines. Now, Holden didn't actually know that Harrington was dead, so when he gets there, he's, like, really shocked at finding out about it. Now, his death is actually explained away as a freak accident. Oh, obviously, he was just, like, in a car, and he crashed into, like, some power lines, and it electrocuted him. Too bad, so sad. So Holden attends the funeral, and there he runs into Harrington's beautiful niece, Joanna, who he kind of, like, met her before, like, on the plane. Like, they were on the same plane over, and she was like, hey, you're blocking my way to the aisle. I have to go to the John or whatever. But it's like he didn't formally meet her then, but he meets her now. Now, Joanna, who's played by Peggy Cummins, she actually believes wholeheartedly that Carswell had something to do with her uncle dying. And she even gives Holden, like, her uncle's journal in which he wrote about, like, some weird paranormal shit that had been going on and how he had become convinced that Carswell had, basically laid a death curse on him. So naturally, Holden is just not having any of this, and he starts mansplaining to Joanna that I've studied all of this, it's like if somebody believes strongly enough that they've been cursed, like with a death curse, then it's their own psychosomatic belief, that's the thing that kills them, but that satanic curses and black magic and all that stuff are absolutely not real. Now, after Holden decides that he's going to continue Harrington's investigation into Carswell, though, little weird things start happening. For example, Carswell actually approaches Holden in the reading room, like, of the British Museum, like in the library. And he's, like, Holden is there looking for this, like, occult book that Harrington had mentioned in his notes, but it's missing mysteriously. But Carswell comes in and says, oh, I have a copy of that book, and I'll loan it to you if you come out to my house or whatever. So Carswell gives Holden this, like, visiting card that has, like, his address printed on it and all that. But it also has a handwritten message on it that seems to be low-key threatening Holden that his time is running out. And then later on, the handwriting disappears off the card, and he takes it, like, Holden takes it to all these different tests, like, to have all these tests on it, being like, I know I saw that fucking handwriting on there, but they can't find any, like, scientific trace of it, like it was never there. So there's that. Also, Holden discovers that all of the pages of his date book, like after a certain date, have been ripped out. Not by him, and he doesn't really know how that happened. And it's almost as though, hey, bud, you're not going to be needing a calendar like after that particular time because you're going to be, dead. So then Joanna tells Holden that her uncle had the exact same thing happen to him. Like the pages in his date book were also mysteriously ripped out after a certain date. And that date also happened to be the day that Harrington died in the car crash. Again, Holden is just not buying it. He says, oh, Harrington dying on that particular day, that was just a strange coincidence, or it was a case of self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, Holden actually does go to see Carswell at his fucking palatial estate. It's a big thing. Like, he lives with his mom, but it's like this big, huge, like, English palace type mansion type situation. And when he goes there, like, the magician is actually really cordial and very genteel and, like, offers him tea and all that. But he absolutely does not try to hide the fact that he's like, yep, totally summoned a demon to curse you. And he basically tells him directly, it's like, you're going to die in 3 days if you don't knock off this investigation. And then, like, to prove to Holden that he actually does have magical powers and shit, he even kind of stirs up this cyclone tornado kind of thing, like a windstorm, while him and Holden are, like, out in the garden. But Holden is still not convinced by this, thinking it's all just kind of like parlor tricks, or again, just like a weird anomaly that's like a coincidence. And then, when Holden is reading Harrington's diary, he actually discovers that before the professor died, he got past a piece of parchment with runic symbols on it, hence casting the runes, which was what the name of the original story was. And he got past it, like, without his knowledge, like it was slipped into his stuff. And this was the scrap of paper that got burned in the fire, like, at the beginning of the movie. So Joanna actually persuades Holden to see if Carswell passed him a similar piece of paper. And lo and behold, it turns out that Carswell actually had slipped one kind of surreptitiously into Holden's stuff while he was at the British Museum. Like he was like, oh, I knocked all your shit off the table. And that was when he put it in there, like when he's put it back up. So while he's like, holy shit, like the dude did do the same thing, this little piece of parchment like whips itself out of Holden's hand almost as like it has a mind of its own. And it tries to incinerate itself in the fireplace, but it can't get in there because there's like a big metal screen in front of it. So Holden like pulls it out and like sticks it in his pocket just in case. He's maybe starting to think a little bit. It's like, maybe there is something kind of weird going on here. And then shortly after this, there's kind of I gotta say, it's kind of like a silly scene where Carswell's mom organizes a seance. Like, you're not really sure if Carswell's mom is like on Carswell's side or is trying to help Holden and Joanna. Like, it's really never made super clear. But she kind of puts together this seance, and Holden and Joanna go to it, and then Professor Harrington, who, remember, is dead, apparently communicates through this medium guy that's there, and he warns Holden pretty much that the curse is real, and it's like, hey, you need to go to Carswell's house and find this translation that he has, like, of the runic symbols. Now, even though Holden is still kind of skeptical at this point, and he thinks the seance is, pretty much horseshit, he kind of agrees to go with Joanna, and he's like, okay, well, we're going to straight up break into Carswell's house to find this translated book. Like, Joanna was going to go do it by herself, but Holden, of course, like, Stephanie's like, I'm the man. I'll do the breaking and entering here. You know what I mean? So Holden gets busted, though. Like, it was just right in the study there with, like, gives, like, what? I wasn't doing anything. Not only that, but he gets attacked in Carswell's study by a sweet little kitty whose name is Grey Malkin. And he actually appears as a panther, like, for a few brief seconds while he's attacking. And, also, like, tears up his clothes. He doesn't, like, fuck him up or anything like that, but he just tears his clothes all up. Now, Carswell comes in, and he's just, like, cool as a cucumber, and he's like, oh, yeah, I did that whole thing using magic. Like, you didn't see a panther. It was just this little kitty right here. What are you talking about? You know what I mean? But it was that kind of stuff. So Holden, again, still maintaining his very skeptical stance, despite all of the mounting evidence to the contrary. So as Holden is leaving the house, because he's like, look, I'm not going to call the cops or anything like that. Just get the fuck out of here. He's like, look, I'll even let you go down the main driveway instead of you, like, creeping around the back of the house, like, when you got in. He's like, I'll turn all the lights on in the driveway for you to go out to your car and everything. Like, I'm a good sport about your breaking and entering. But Holden, in a scene, this was like, okay. So Holden says, no, I'm going to go through the woods because that's the way I came. And he's like, that's my only superstition is that I like to go back the way I came, which I was kind of like, okay, that seems like a random a random way of just like getting him to go back through the creepy woods, but okay, whatever. So Carswell is basically like, I wouldn't go in the woods if I were you, but of course, like Holden is like, no, fuck it, I'm going through the woods. I'm the man, like I said. So predictably, he gets chased through the woods by this creepy like smoke configuration. Like I said, the smoke effect is like really cool, where it's like a whoosh, 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 like coming through the sky or whatever. And there's also this kind of, because I forgot to mention it before, but when the demon attacks, like when the demon attacks like Professor Harrington at the beginning, there's kind of like this poofy smoke thing, and then the demon comes out, and then there's like this real high pitched, it almost sounds like crickets, like a bunch of crickets, like a really high pitched kind of noise. So he's like being chased through the woods through this, and this smoky thing and the crickets, and he's like, holy shit, oh my god, and he like just starts running his ass off like toward the car. But all of this still doesn't make Holden like stop his investigation though, like he's still doing it. And in the course of this investigation, him and his colleagues, they hypnotize this catatonic man. They kind of like mentioned him before. His name is Rand Hobart, and he was a member of Carswell's cult. Now, while he's under hypnosis, he says to everybody that he was also chosen for death, and he was passed a parchment, like without his knowledge, but that he managed to, because obviously he's still alive, but he managed to avoid the curse by sneaking the paper back to the person who gave it to him. So Holden, basically, because he still has the parchment that Carswell gave him as well, so he takes it out of his pocket and he's like, is this the parchment? Was it like this? And then fucking Hobart flips the fuck out because he thinks that Holden is trying to give it to him, you know what I mean? And he's just like, oh no, and it's like, I guess that'll like make the demon come after him now. But then, this is a completely nonsensical, he tears off down the hall, like he's so scared by Holden trying to give him this piece of paper that he just like jumps off the thing, runs off down the hall, and leaps out the window and dies. So I was like, so you wouldn't take the paper because it meant that you'll die, but then he just goes and like yeets himself off a building and dies anyway? I mean, it seems kind of counterproductive is all I'm saying. Maybe there's a whole thing where it's like, well, it's better to just like die by jumping out a window like suicide than getting eaten by the demon, or maybe the demon takes you to like eternal damnation or something like that, whereas just jumping out a window wouldn't. I don't really know, but I was just kind of like, I was like, well, you died anyway, so, you know, why didn't you just like chill out? I don't know. Okay, so at this point, like the whole being chased by clearly supernatural smoke and crickety noises in the woods situation has finally gotten Holden on board with the fact that he is the recipient of a death curse. But now, thanks to Crazy Hobart, he has the knowledge of how to combat it. But time is running very, very short. He only has, like, at the point that he kind of, like, realizes this, he only has a couple hours left before he's, like, supposed to die. Now, he finds out that Carswell is going to be taking a train to Southampton, like, that evening. And he also discovers that Carswell has kind of, like, bewitched Joanna into coming with him. I'm assuming as, like, insurance or something like that. So Holden actually manages to get on the same train, like, you know, right before it leaves the station. And then when he finds Carswell and Joanna in the compartment, there's kind of like a little bit of back and forth with Holden trying to like return the parchment to Carswell, like without Carswell like figuring it out, you know what I mean? So Carswell is onto this shit though, obviously, and he's like getting real touchy about it. So he just refuses to take anything that Holden tries to hand him. It is like he loans him some matches like to light a cigarette, and then he's like, here, have the matchbook back. And he's like, no, you keep it, you know what I mean? So he's onto this whole fucking shit. But it so happens that that Holden was actually able to sneak the paper into the pocket of Carswell's overcoat, like while he was doing all this other shit with the matches and everything. So after the magician like hops off the train, like the piece of paper like blows out, because I guess it's implied that the piece of paper has to like be destroyed and then the demon will come, you know what I mean? So it whips itself out of your hand and like throws itself into a fireplace or does whatever, or burns itself up somehow, and then the demon is just like, oh, time to come and like fuck shit up, you know what I mean? So he's chasing the paper like desperately like down the train tracks, and it keeps whipping itself out of his hand, and it's like it finally like burns up. And then, you know, here comes the smoke and here comes the demon. And probably, I think this is like the scene that always gets shown. This is like the most famous scene in the movie, where the demon just like starts like steaming down the fucking the train tracks, almost like it's a train itself. Like it's this kind of, and it's this big like medieval looking demon, like fucking wings and claws, and it's like it's huge and it's really, really cool looking. So it basically like attacks him, And I think it's implied that nobody can see the demon except for the person that it's coming after. So Carswell's death, because the demon does kill him, is explained away as him getting run over by the train and like dragged along the tracks. So the demon really mangled the dude, apparently. So, like I said, this is definitely one of the better horror films from the 1950s. It's obviously not all that scary by today's standards, and it's pretty easy to see where it's gonna go. But overall, I found myself really enjoying it. Dr. Holden, like the main protagonist, he's a little bit bland and also like kind of pompous, which is sort of like infuriating. At least until he twigs onto the fact that, an actual demon is like gunning for his ass and maybe he needs to do something about that. But I liked the interplay between him and Joanna, because Joanna just did not take any shit from him at all and told him off like multiple times for being just a conceited jackwagon. And she's like, look, the demon is real. You need to do something about this shit. I don't even care. So that was good. The actor, like Niall McGuinness, was also quite delightful as as Carswell, who was the villain. He was very charismatic and like really sinister, but he didn't really go over the top. Like he always came across as like really friendly, but there was always this kind of like evil like lurking below the surface, and I thought it was like a really good performance. Now, I could have done without the seance scene, because that seemed like it was only there for kind of mild comic relief purposes and sort of conveyed information that the audience pretty much already knew or could have figured out on their own. But I mean, I didn't really mind it all that much because it was like pretty short. I also kind of wish the demon hadn't been shown at the beginning of the movie, like, when Harrington got killed, because I think that then, if you were watching the movie, you would have had cause to doubt whether the curse was real or not. And then you'd have like you'd be blindsided by this big reveal at the end of this like massive medieval looking demon like steaming down the train tracks. And that would have been really cool. And again, that demon just looks really, really awesome, like especially for 1957. But I mean, these are like just really minor nitpicks. And, it's very, very easy, even watching it nowadays, to see why this movie is just like so revered, and it gets brought up a lot when they're talking about like really good movies, really classic movies from the 1950s. I'm gonna say it's not quite as like atmospheric or like as stylish maybe as Jacques Tourneur's 1940s movies like Cat People and stuff, but I mean, it's still undeniably a classic, and if you're super, super into horror, you should probably do yourself a favor and see it. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear, and remember to like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and all of that other good stuff, and I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.